כן. את המסר שאני רוצה היום לדבר, אף פעם לא עשיתי את זה כמו
I've never spoken about it as a subject, but on the one hand, I read in the New Testament about the judgment or court, and also the subject of court, of judgment. We hear this in the news, we hear about it in the news. We also talk in the news. Did you ever have in your heart to complain about someone? To file a complaint? And I think it's better not to do so. It's better not to go to court, not to file a complaint, and that no one will file a complaint against you. Whoever was in court, was it a good experience? I believe for many, maybe most of the people who go to court, it's not such a good experience. Why? Because in the beginning, you think, I am right. And in the process, you see that the other side, he thinks he's right. Or his lawyer is receiving money and tells stories that make it very unpleasant for you. So for many people who go to court, it's not so easy. It's not such a good and pleasant experience. And also I, as a believer, I remember I was in court once. And I believe it's good that we read in Romans chapter 12. As far as possible, don't get to court with anyone. So, we'll continue on this line. We think of court of law upon the earth, among men, but we also get to the courtroom of God. So we'll survey these a little bit, and I hope that God will guide us as we learn these things. Before we continue in the Bible, I do want to say personally, on a personal note, when I read or see with my eyes a court of law and politicians in it being judged, there's not one, there's many, and also CEOs of companies, people who think that you think they need to be an example, and they should be the leaders. They give work to many people. To see them in court for illegal things that they did, it's hard for me. I don't know how it is for you, But for me, it hurts, because you think that when you look to leaders, you think they're doing good things. But after years, you discover that they did all sorts of things behind the back that were not okay. And it hurts to see such a thing. But on the other hand, there's also good things. Sometimes there's the good part, as much as it hurts, to see that before court, you don't have people with rights and privileges and the other one doesn't have. It's good to see that even if you are rich, you mustn't steal, and if you're poor, you mustn't steal. It applies to both. Is this something new? Law, a court of law? Is it a problem? Is it our problem today? The answer is no. Let's look at some points in the Old Testament and in the Torah. And we won't dwell a long time on these things. We'll just scan some verses quickly. Let's go to Exodus chapter 18. Exodus chapter 18. Moses is the leader of the people, and many people come to him. And what do they come to him with? They want him to judge. Because there's problems between people. There were then problems. It's not a new thing. And even issues between one person and another. That was keeping Moses busy from morning till night. And his father-in-law, his father-in-law saw it and said, "What are you doing? All day you're busy with this." And he later, Moses changed the method, and he put, and he made judges on all sorts of issues and at all sorts of levels. And only if it's not worked out, then the worst problems get to him. And this is the system today. When people need to settle matters, they go to court. And this is not a new thing. Then in Joshua, the book of Joshua, Joshua, who led the people after Moses, he was also standing before God, and the leaders and the judges of the people. So there were judges. And then later on, there was a book in the Bible called Judges. So let's look in Judges. Judges chapter 4. Judges chapter 4 and verses 4 and 5. So, one of the judges was a lady called Deborah. And that doesn't settle with everyone. How can a lady be a judgess and people come to her? And I don't want to defend the High Court of Israel, but in our High Court we have women, and people say, how can a lady hold so much power heading the High Court of Israel? But there was a lady judge, and people came to her to be judged, to get justice. After Judges, we get to the book of Samuel. First Samuel and chapter 7. So this is about Samuel. Now Samuel is more famous. He is more known as a prophet. Someone who grew up with the priests in the tabernacle. But his work as a judge, he was occupied as a judge quite a bit, as he did the circuits. Was going from one place to the other, judging people. People would come to him to be judged, and this was keeping him occupied. And people were looking for someone who could judge. And when they came to the prophet, they looked for someone who would know what is right before God. And this was also with Moses. He was supposed to know what is right before God. They were looking for the priest or the prophet to receive justice from him. So, again, maybe it's best that people don't have issues among themselves and they don't need to go to court. But inside our family we have issues, and we have issues with the neighbors and all sorts of things that don't always get solved. That's the way it is today, and that's the way it was always. And it's good that there is someone that you can go to who can give judgment and wisdom from God. Now, after these examples, we have to look at how it continues. We stay in Samuel and we go to chapter 8. The next verses are verses 1, 2 and 3. This is not good. From these verses you can learn a lot. It's sad, but we can learn a lot from these verses. The fact that the father of the family or someone in the family has fear of God and serves God doesn't mean that his sons will be the same. No child receives the faith through father or mother. They can pass on the teaching and raising them up. And this is what we try in our home. And I know others try to raise their children this way. but it's not automatic. At the end, the kids grow and they have their responsibility. Maybe the father and mother want to keep the responsibility, but they can't. My mother told me, and I remember this, she told me there is a time that you speak to a child about God, and then there's a time that you speak to God about the child. And this stayed in my head. I want my kids to walk with God, but I know that it is not in our power. Our power is limited. I believe that Samuel wanted this, that his children will walk in his ways. He made them judges. But you can see, no, they didn't walk in his ways. So then, in the end, when the child grows, they have their own responsibility to walk before God or to walk in other ways. And the situation here, it could be worse even. Why? Because you would think that if they are the sons of Samuel, the prophet, they would have a fear of God, they would know God. So if someone does such evil, even worse, it's worse than if they were the sons of someone who did not fear God. So sometimes people who seem like they are God-fearers, and then you discover that they're not God-fearers at all, it's even worse. It ruins even more. Because you expect them to be and they're not. So what didn't go right here? They didn't walk in the ways of their father, the ways of God. They went in another way. What other way? That other things are more important. What are the more important things? Dishonest gain. Bribery. And then you can't judge properly. You think, who paid me the most? The one who paid me the most, he will receive justice. Where there is wanting money and where there is bribery, then you have a problem. This was the problem in the past, and this is the problem today. Let's go back to Exodus. We were in Exodus. Let's go back to Exodus chapter 23. Exodus chapter 23. Not that they didn't know that it was this way. Also in the law we read, and not once, maybe twice or three times, it's written very clearly about bribery and what it does. And there are a few things here written, but what especially I want to take note of is that justice, the judgment, has to that the poor man has the same rights as the rich, but it many times does not work out that way. I've seen in many cases, I can even tell you a little story about how this is not worked out. And the other thing, which is similar but different, when someone is in a position of power, and there's a rich man and a poor man, the rich man, he can pay, he can get a good lawyer, he can do something to get help. And that way, you can get some financial help, so that way judgment is not right anymore. People think that it only affects a little bit, and judgment will be right, but no, it won't. It makes the judge blind. When you received a bribe, that's it. You cannot judge correctly if you received a bribe in any way. And that was the way it was with Samuel's kids. And this was a bad situation for the people. And they did other things that we won't get into right now. So let's look in the New Testament now. Let's go to Matthew, the first book of the New Testament. And Matthew chapter 5. And chapter 5 is the Sermon on the Mount. And we learned it in the congregation in the last year. So Matthew chapter 5 and verses 25 This connects with what we said at the beginning of the message. Better not to go to court. If you have something to settle with someone, try and settle it without court, outside of court. It is better to do so. Afterwards, if you don't do that way and you do go to court, it can really go a bad way. You don't know how it will end. If you can, also in the congregation and generally in life, try to settle it as soon as possible. I'm not saying that it always works, but try. Then, Jesus, too, they came to him with complaints about someone else. And we read about it in one place. Luke chapter 12. Luke. Someone came with a question to Jesus, and let's see how Jesus answered him. Someone came to Jesus with a serious problem. The problem was about inheritance. Where I come from, there is a saying, Pitgam. Someone said, and it's a non-believer's saying. Someone says, we get along very well in our family. And someone then asks him, oh, have you reached the point of inheritance yet? Because you get along very well till it gets to inheritance. And then Many times people remember things and they start complaining one about the other. And I deserve this and he doesn't deserve that. And I say this with a smile, but there are very serious issues between people over these things of inheritance, and it gets to court. And there's no peace in the family because of that. And that could be for a long time. And it could be that someone heard about Jesus, that Jesus is wise, and he wants to go to Jesus and wants to know, does Jesus say, I'm right or my brother? He comes to Jesus with a serious problem, and what kind of answer does he get? He says, it's not my job. And he says, more than that, make sure that you don't want money, that your wanting money doesn't consume you, because many problems come from that. Is this true? Yes, of course. I can sometimes think, oh, I want more, but then I think, no, these thoughts are not from God. Jesus is right. The will to have more money, more things, it can do a lot of damage to you. And so Jesus makes a separation between the things of the world and the things of God. What makes problems in the world and what you should not have? And what makes problems in your life? Look at what Jesus says. What Jesus says is important. Let's look at another problem that was in a congregation. In the Corinthian congregation, it was a lively congregation, there was lots of action there. Many people came to faith in Corinth, but the Corinthians was also a congregation with problems, and we understand this when you read the epistles. So let's go to the first epistle to the Corinthians. First Corinthians. Chapter 6. So there were problems inside the congregation, and people were not always getting along with one another, and at least partially some of them were going to court. So then there was a question asked in 1 Corinthians 6. So we read here about Shaul, Paul, writing to them and saying, if you don't get along on the matters of life, different matters, why do you go to a lawyer or a judge who's outside the congregation? Why can't you settle it among yourselves? Now, he's not saying you mustn't, but he is saying you are supposed to settle this among yourselves. Now, this is not always an easy question. How is it for us as believers? that the courtroom of the government, the state, is it for us or is it not for us? And this is sometimes a sensitive issue, and in the next minutes we'll touch on this point. We start in one place where many believers will find it to be a surprise, and that is in Romans. Let's go to Romans together. Romans chapter 13. The same Paul who told the Corinthians it's better not to go to a court that belongs to the state. He says here very clearly and strongly that the authority for these roles, including court of law, is from God. And it's not so easy to settle this question. They don't believe in God, so how did God give them authority? But God explains. God knows what president is being elected in Iran, in America. God is not losing control over anything. And this would include judges as well. And he says, if you do good, then you will receive good. And you will not have to be afraid. And this is true to stand before the law and know what the judges say and be an example. It's not always easy. Sorry that it's taking a long time, but there are a few important things that I want to put the finger on. We look at 3 examples. Where you see it's a bit problematic. Let's look at Acts chapter 4. Acts chapter 4. Jesus went up to heaven. He's not with the disciples anymore. They received the Holy Spirit and they are evangelizing freely everywhere. And Peter, James and John, they healed someone, and many people come to faith through that, and we see what is going on. Acts 4. And then the priests in the temple, they start worrying about what is going on. And they see people coming to faith and they say, we need to stop this. What's going on here? So they stopped Peter and John, and they wanted to arrest them and put them in jail. But they understood they didn't do something so bad. We can't. And the people will complain if we do such a thing. So they had an idea. We'll scare them. We'll intimidate them. and tell them you mustn't speak in that name anymore. And that way will stop the issue. So this situation we read about in Acts chapter 4 verse 18 and 19. So the priests were telling them, shut up, you mustn't talk about this. Don't speak in Jesus' name anymore. But Peter and John said, you tell us, who should we listen to more? What God tells us or what man tells us? And they brought it to them as a question so that they can understand that they will not abide by this rule that they try to give them. So they say that actually it was more important for them to evangelize in Jesus' name, and they are willing to receive punishment for that. So now we'll come to another two things, and you'll be surprised. Let's go back to Genesis. Chapter 19, Genesis chapter 19. Genesis 19, 7 and 9. This is Lot's story. Where Lot lived was Sodom. He parted from Abraham and lived in Sodom. And guests came to him, and the people of Sodom, bring your guests to us. And this is unpleasant to hear. We want to have sex with them. Now, in verses 7 and 9 we will read. So there's something small here that you might not have noticed. The people of Sodom want to continue. They want to do the evil deed they plan to do. And Lot is standing in their way. Because Lot is not agreeing. And he wants to stop this evil deed. And what do they complain? Who are you? You are here new and you want to judge? Did Lot say anything that was not right? Lot was in an evil environment. And if in an evil environment someone tells the truth and what needs to be done, then he is accused. Why are you a judge? Where are you bringing this from? And this is, he's trying to stop an evil sexual deed. Now, a few days ago in our family, we read a story we know, but we looked at it from a different perspective. And that's the story of John the Baptist. We'll go to Mark What happened there to John the Baptist? Herod heard about all the miracles of Jesus, and he thought maybe this is John the Baptist who has risen from the dead, because he knew John the Baptist, that he was a righteous person, and he killed John the Baptist. So let's see why. Mark chapter 6. (17 and 18). What happened to John the Baptist and why? Why was he in prison in the first place, and why was he killed? He was a righteous person, so what's the problem? Even Herod knew that he was righteous, so why was he in prison? Because he said something that he was forbidden to say. He told Herod, "You took the wife of your brother, and this is forbidden." And the wife that Herod took, she hated that so much. It's a bit of a complicated story, but she caused the death of John the Baptist, and Herod knew that John the Baptist was right. And he knew that it was wrong to kill John, but he did so just because he promised to do so. So John the Baptist opened his mouth and said, "You mustn't do this," and because of this he suffered. And he wasn't, yes, even if you're the king of the whole area, you cannot do such a thing as marry your brother's wife. Sometimes telling the truth can give you trouble. And I take these two things that I feel are very relevant. Now in the West, and maybe in all of the world, in the last 50, maybe 100 years, things have changed a lot. Maybe 100 years ago, you couldn't say you mustn't have two women living together in a sexual relationship. Today, it's a problem if you don't agree with such a relationship. And sometimes, to say the truth, people say, "How can you judge? Who are you?" But John did so and suffered, paid for what he said. And if we stand for what is written in the Bible, and not by the spirit of the times, that can give us trouble. And I don't agree with everything that Michael says or does. And Michael and I, Maze, Alma, we had very much we had some quarrels, and when Michael sees something that he thinks is not good, he speaks about it. But when Michael sees something that he doesn't like, he speaks against it. And the same in Sodom. People say, everyone does this. What's the problem? But sometimes you have to open your mouth and talk, even if it gives you trouble. And sometimes you need to do such a thing. You need to open your mouth and say what is right. So, I think maybe it was a bit long. I'm progressing toward the end. Jesus lost in a court case. Let's look at that. Jesus lost the court case among the priests. And then he was brought to Herod, and Jesus lost. In Matthew 26, we read about it, and in Mark 15, they were looking for witnesses against Jesus, and they did it out of jealousy toward Jesus. They knew that Jesus did not do anything wrong, but they brought him because of jealousy. And then everyone wanted Jesus crucified, so he did deliver him to death. And Jesus lost the case. But all of the authority comes from God, and that was under God's control. Jesus didn't receive justice. He didn't receive justice, and that caused Jesus to die, but he died for us. So even if bad things happen in this world, Jesus gives authority and he is in control. And sometimes unpleasant things happen. Now, our judgment before God. If we want to stand before God in judgment, we won't succeed. No person will succeed. Why? Because we are not perfect. Many people tried but have not succeeded. There are people who try and try, but no one can abide by the law and say, I am perfect. Everyone needs God's grace and forgiveness in order to be in God's courtroom and abide and stand. Jesus will come as a judge. But when Jesus came to the world, his mission, his purpose was not to come and judge when he came first time, but to give salvation. God and Jesus do not want to judge, but they want people to come to faith. They want people to come to Jesus. The last verse is in 1 Corinthians 11:32. And verse 32. 1 Corinthians 11:32. And this verse is in the context of the Lord's Supper. He's telling people, judge yourself. Doesn't matter what the other ones think. It's more important what God thinks about you. When we are judged, we are chastened by the Lord, that we may not be condemned with the world. We have to settle things as soon as possible. When we sin, and that happens, then we have to bring the sin to light. Not to say, it's not so bad. To bring sin to light and ask for forgiveness and to always be in touch with the Lord Jesus. And so everyone will be able to go through the courtroom of God.